Sister and brother-in-law want me to be their surrogate mother, but done the natural way. I'm at a complete loss and need advice. I never thought I'd be in this position, but here I am, typing out something that feels more like a weird movie plot than my real life. I'm 30 years old, single, and living a pretty normal life. My family has always been small but close. My older sister Marie is 41 and has been in my life since our mom passed away when I was 12. Marie took on that motherly role for me, and because of that, I've always had respect for her stepping up and taking the role. She's married to Paul, who's 45, and they've been together for over 15 years. Paul is a charming and accomplished man who always seemed to have Marie's back. Together they've been the picture-perfect, happy, successful couple. But there's one thing Marie has always wanted that she hasn't been able to have: children. Marie has dreamed of being a mother for as long as I can remember. I've seen her light up whenever she's around babies, and the sadness in her eyes when she talks about the struggles she and Paul have gone through. Unfortunately, by the time she and Paul were ready to start trying for kids, her natural fertility had already began to decline. She tried everything: fertility treatments, alternative medicine, everything the doctors suggested, but nothing worked. Now, her doctors have told her she's facing permanent infertility due to her age. They explain that her eggs are no longer viable and that her chances of conceiving naturally are non-existent. I've done some reading on this to try to understand what she's going through. It turns out that women are born with all the eggs they'll ever have, and over time, the quantity and quality of those eggs decline. By the time a woman reaches her late 30s, her chances of conceiving drop significantly, and by her 40s, natural pregnancy is almost impossible. Marie's experience lines up with everything I've read. Despite everything, Marie hasn't let go of her dream of having a child. She and Paul looked into adoption, but Marie didn't feel it was the right fit. She's always said she wanted to experience motherhood as fully as possible, and for her, that means carrying her own child. Surrogacy became their next option, but the costs were overwhelming. She told me once that the expense of medical surrogacy felt impossible, and even if they could afford it, she didn't trust a stranger to carry her baby. Last week, Marie and Paul invited me over for dinner. I thought it was just a normal family dinner, but from the moment I got there, I felt something was off. They were way more attending and kept exchanging nervous looks. After dinner, they sat me down, and Marie began to speak. She told me they had a serious favor to ask, and that they had spent weeks thinking about how to approach me with it. Marie asked me if I would be willing to be their surrogate. At first I was touched. It felt like such an honor to be trusted with something so important. I've always looked up to Marie, and her asking me to help her with her dream felt like a testament to how close we are as sisters. But then she kept talking, and my jaw has never wanted to drop so hard before. She didn't mean surrogacy in the traditional sense. She meant the natural way, as in, she wanted me to conceive a child with Paul by sleeping with him. I didn't know how to react. I was stunned. I think I even laughed nervously when they said it because I thought maybe she was joking, but she wasn't. She and Paul were completely serious. Marie explained that this was the most logical option for them. She said that because we're sisters, the baby would share some of her genetics, which was important to her. She also said this would save them the cost and complications of medical intervention. Paul just nodded the whole time like everything she was saying made perfect sense. I froze. I didn't know what to say or how to respond. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting for an answer, but all I could think about was the pressure that was being put on me. Marie kept talking, explaining how much this would mean to her and how much she believed I could help her. She even mentioned that they'd be willing to support me completely when it came to expenses and finances. In the moment, I panicked. I couldn't bring myself to say no outright. I felt so much pressure, and I didn't want to disappoint Marie. She looked so hopeful, and I've never been good at letting her down. So I told them I needed time to think about it. Since then, I haven't been able to stop thinking about what they asked me. I've gone over every detail of that conversation in my head, trying to figure out how we got to this point. Marie and Paul have always been a little unconventional, but this feels like a step too far. At the same time, I can't shake the guilt I feel. I know how much this means to her, and I know how much she's suffered trying to have a child. She's been there for me so many times in my life, and I feel like I owe her. But this feels like too much. I've been trying to think of a way to tell her no, but every time I go over the conversation in my head, I imagine her crying or worse, resenting me for not helping her. I keep telling myself that maybe I'm overreacting, that this could just be their way of thinking outside the box. After all, they're both so desperate to have a baby. But then I think about what it would actually mean, what they're actually asking me to do, and I feel sick. I haven't spoken to either of them since that night. I told them I needed space to think, and they've respected that so far, but I know they're waiting for an answer. I feel like I'm trapped. On one hand, I want to help my sister. I know how much she's been through, and I don't want to be the reason her dream of having a family dies. But on the other hand, this just feels so wrong. I don't know what to do. I feel like there's no right answer here. If I say no, I'll hurt my sister and possibly damage our relationship. If I say yes, I don't even know how I'll live with myself afterward. I'm posting this because I need perspective. Is this as crazy as it feels, or am I overthinking it? Am I a terrible sister for even considering saying no? Please, Reddit, tell me what you think. I'm desperate for advice. Update 1. Hi everyone, thank you so much for all the responses to my first post. I've read through so many of your comments, and they've given me a lot to think about. I honestly wasn't expecting so many people to chime in, but I appreciate both the support and the reality checks. This entire situation has been on my mind a lot, and I feel like I've gone through every emotion imaginable: confusion, guilt, frustration, and even moments where I thought, maybe this isn't as crazy as it feels. Since my last post, I've had a bit more time to process everything and finally took steps to address the situation. I'll explain everything that's happened so far, but honestly, I feel like I'm still just as lost. To start, Marie and Paul had asked me to keep everything a secret. They didn't want anyone else in the family, or even close friends, to know about their request. At first, I thought it was because they were embarrassed about how unconventional it was, but now I'm starting to wonder if it's because they knew how strange it sounded and didn't want anyone else to tell me outright that it was wrong. Still, I've kept it to myself, though it's been hard not to vent to someone I trust. After a lot of thinking and encouragement from the comments, I decided to talk to Marie alone. I figured it would be easier to have a real conversation without Paul there, and honestly, I wanted to see if she would open up about why she thought this was the best or only option. I invited her over for coffee yesterday, and she came over looking excited, which made it even harder for me to start the conversation. I told her I'd been thinking about what she and Paul had asked, and that I was struggling to wrap my head around it. I reminded her how much I loved her and how much I wanted to help, but I said that what they were asking felt off. I tried to be gentle but strong on my point. I brought up alternatives, like adoption or traditional medical surrogacy. That's when everything took a turn. Marie started crying, like full-on sobbing, and told me she had already thought of all of that. She said adoption didn't feel right to her because she wanted the child to be connected to her in some way. She said surrogacy through a clinic was out of the question because of the cost and the fear of trusting a stranger with something so important. She even mentioned how the whole process felt cold and impersonal, and she wanted this to be as intimate and natural as possible. She begged me to understand that this wasn't just about wanting a baby. It was about wanting a family that felt like hers and Paul's. She said she trusted me more than anyone in the world, and that if I carried the baby, it would mean so much more to her than if a stranger did it. Then she started making promises, saying they'd take care of me financially and emotionally through the whole process. She even said they'd pay me, though she framed it more as a token of appreciation than actual compensation. I didn't know how to respond. Seeing Marie like that, so desperate and vulnerable, hit me hard. I've seen her cry before, but this was different. It wasn't just sadness. It was like she was begging for her life. I told her I needed her to take a few days to really think about what she was asking, to make sure this was truly the only option she wanted to pursue. She agreed, but I could tell she was hoping I'd already made up my mind. Since she left, I've been going back and forth in my head. The guilt is overwhelming. I feel like if I say no, I'll be crushing her last chance at the family she's always dreamed of. And the truth is, I've started to wonder if maybe it's not as big of a deal as it feels. I hate admitting this, but part of me has started rationalizing it. I'm single, I don't have any major commitments right now, and I've been in a bit of a rut in my own life. I'm not saying I want to do this, but I've caught myself thinking, what if this is my chance to do something meaningful? I also can't deny that Paul is attractive. It feels wrong to even think that way, but I'd be lying if I said it hadn't crossed my mind. Another thing that's been messing with me is the way Marie described Paul. She's always talked about how amazing their marriage is and how attentive he is. She's told me about how great he is in bed, but I'm trying not to let those thoughts cloud my judgment. But they're there, and I hate myself for it. I know how all of this sounds. I know it's not normal to even entertain the idea, but I feel like I'm being pulled in a million directions. Every time I think about saying no, I picture Marie's face when she was crying in my kitchen, and it's like I lose either way. I haven't spoken to Paul since that night, but I feel like he's the one who played a big part in all of this. He barely said anything during the initial conversation, and I wonder how much of this is actually his idea. Does he really want this? Or is he just going along with it because he loves Marie? I can't tell, and it's another thing that's keeping me up at night. For now, I'm waiting for Marie to get back to me after taking some time to think. I told her I needed her to be absolutely sure this is what she wants before I can even consider giving her an answer. In the meantime, I'm still trying to sort out my own feelings. So many of you in the comments were split, some saying this is absolutely insane and I should run, others saying that family is everything and I should consider it if it's what Marie truly wants. I don't know which side I agree with yet. I feel like I'm stuck between the choices, and neither one is giving me a clear answer. I'll keep you updated when I know more. For now, I'm just hoping I can make the right decision without ruining my relationship with my sister, or myself. Update 2. Hello again everyone. I'm back with another update, and things have taken a turn I didn't expect. First, I want to thank those who commented on my first update, even if some of the responses were rants. I know this situation is unconventional, to put it lightly, and I've been questioning myself every step of the way. Unfortunately, my gut feeling was right. This situation has spiraled into something I'm not sure I can handle. After my last conversation with Marie, she took a couple of days to think things over, just like I asked. When she got back to me, she was more certain than ever that this was what she wanted. She told me she had thought about everything I said: adoption, surrogacy through a clinic, even the ethical implications of what they were asking, and still came back to the same conclusion. She said that having me carry her child through this natural method felt like the most meaningful and loving option. Marie also told me that Paul was on board and supportive of whatever decision I made. She assured me again that if I agreed, they would take care of everything, from my financial needs during the pregnancy to any recovery afterward. She even upped the amount of money they'd give me as a thank you. She was pulling out all the stops to convince me, and I could feel myself caving under the pressure. I think what ultimately pushed me over the edge was the guilt. Seeing how desperate she was and knowing how much this meant to her made me feel like I couldn't say no. I told myself that if I could help my sister achieve her dream of being a mother, maybe this wasn't such a crazy idea after all. So, I said yes. Marie was over the moon when I told her. She hugged me, cried, and thanked me over and over, telling me how much this meant to her. Paul called me later that night to thank me as well. He sounded genuinely grateful, though the whole conversation felt a bit awkward. I tried not to overthink it and just focused on the fact that I was doing this for Marie. We made a plan. Marie would leave the house for the day, so she wouldn't have to be there when Paul and I did what needed to be done. She said it would be too emotional for her to handle, and I agreed that her not being there was for the best. Paul was the one who set everything up, and I have to admit, he put in more effort than I expected. When I arrived at their house on the agreed-upon day, he had lit candles, played soft music, and made the environment as comfortable as possible. It felt scary walking into that situation, but I kept reminding myself of the end goal: a baby for my sister. At first, everything was fine, or at least as fine as a situation like that can be. We were both nervous, but we managed to get through the awkwardness. Paul was gentle and respectful, which helped ease some of my anxiety. I kept telling myself this was just a means to an end, a sacrifice for the greater good. But then, right when it seemed like everything was going according to plan, Paul did something that completely blindsided me. As he was about to finish, he suddenly stopped, pulled away, and told me to leave. I was stunned and confused, but what came next left me absolutely floored. He started laughing, actually laughing, and told me that this whole thing was a joke to him. He said it had been ridiculously easy to manipulate Marie into thinking this was the only way to have a child. He admitted that he didn't care about having a baby and just wanted an excuse to cheat without consequences. I was frozen in shock, trying to process what he was saying. I couldn't believe this was happening. He had seemed so supportive and on board, And now he was revealing that this was all some twisted game to him. He told me I could leave and that Marie wouldn't believe anything I said anyway. Then, as if to add insult to injury, he kicked me out of the house like I was trash. I drove home in an emotional state. My mind was racing with questions. What did I just do? Was Paul telling the truth about manipulating Marie, or was this some kind of power play? I couldn't make sense of it, and I felt disgusted, humiliated, and furious all at once. When I got home, I tried calling Marie. I needed to tell her what had happened and warn her about the man she's married to, but she didn't answer. I called her again and again, leaving messages that became more frantic as the hours passed, but she never called me back. I don't know if Paul got to her first, or if she was just too upset to talk, but the silence from her end is killing me. Now, I'm sitting here, trying to figure out what to do next. Should I confront Paul? Should I go to Marie's house and force her to talk to me? Part of me wants to scream the truth at her until she believes me, but another part of me wonders if she'd even listen. Paul was so confident when he said she wouldn't believe me, and that scares me. I feel like I've been used and discarded, and I don't know how to move forward. I agreed to this because I wanted to help my sister, but now it feels like my trust has been shattered, and my relationship with her might be beyond repair. I'm terrified that Paul will twist this situation to make me look like the villain, and I don't know if she can see through him. I'm still in shock, and I feel like my world has been flipped upside down. This was supposed to be about love and family, but now it feels like I've been dragged into something dark and manipulative. I don't know what to do, and I'm scared that no matter what I choose, I'll lose my sister forever. I'll update again if anything changes, but for now, I'm just trying to figure out how to pick up the pieces. Final update. Well, Reddit, I did all possibly could. I'm sorry if this is long, but man, I'm just feeling sad writing this. The fallout from everything that happened with Paul has left me feeling completely defeated. After the terrible situation with him and his manipulative behavior, I knew I had to take control of the situation and speak directly to Marie. She needed to know the truth about what happened, and I couldn't let Paul's version of events be the only one she heard. So, I tried contacting her. It wasn't easy. Paul seemed to have already worked his magic, twisting the story and putting a wall between us. I texted her, called her, and eventually sent a long message saying we needed to meet and talk in person. I told her it was important, that it couldn't wait, and that it was just between the two of us. To my surprise, she agreed, but her tone was cold and distant. She asked me to meet her at a nearby cafe, and I could feel the tension already building. When I walked into the cafe and saw her sitting there, my heart sank. Marie looked tired and on edge, like she hadn't slept well. When I approached, she barely looked up from her coffee. I knew this conversation was going to be difficult, but I had no idea how much worse it would get. I started by explaining everything. I told her what Paul said and did during our hours together, how he admitted to manipulating her and laughing at both of us. I tried to keep my emotions in check, but the words came out in a rush because I needed her to understand. I told her I believed he'd planned this from the start, using her desperation for a child as a way to control her and get what he wanted. At first, Marie just listened. Her face was just plain at this point, but as I kept talking, I could see her starting to withdraw. Her arms crossed, her jaw tightened, and she started shaking her head before I even finished. When I finally stopped, hoping for some kind of acknowledgement or understanding, she accused me of trying to sabotage her marriage. She said I was selfish, that I didn't want her to be happy, and that I was making up lies because I regretted agreeing to the arrangement in the first place. It was like she couldn't even hear me. Every attempt I made to explain was met with more resistance. She was completely defensive, and it was clear Paul's influence over her was stronger than I realized. I tried to stay calm, but the frustration was overwhelming. I reminded her of how much I loved her, how I only wanted what was best for her, and how I couldn't sit back and watch her be manipulated by someone like Paul. But she wasn't having it. She accused me of being jealous, of wanting to create drama, and of trying to ruin her life. It became clear that Marie was so deep under Paul's control that she couldn't see the situation for what it was. She quickly left the cafe, leaving me sitting there without even considering what I said. I couldn't believe how badly the conversation had gone. I thought I could get through to her, but instead, it felt like I had just pushed her further away. After that meeting, I tried reaching out again, hoping that maybe she'd calm down and rethink what I said, but every call went unanswered and every text was ignored. Then, one day, I realized I was blocked. My messages weren't going through, and my calls went straight to voicemail. It was like she had completely erased me from her life. I didn't know what to do. I felt helpless and lost. The worst part was not knowing what Paul had said to her after our meeting. I could only imagine how he spun the situation to make me somehow the bad person. He had already proven how manipulative he could be, and now he had Marie completely under his thumb. A few days later, Paul called me. I didn't recognize the number, so I answered, hoping it might be Marie, but it was him. His tone was smug as he told me that Marie had made her decision. He said she didn't want me in her life anymore, and that she was cutting me off for good. Hearing those words was like having the final nail driven into the coffin of my relationship with my sister. Paul didn't even try to hide his happiness. He told me I'd never see her again, and that I should accept her choice and move on. The way he said it made my skin crawl, but there was nothing I could do. He had won. I spent the rest of that night crying, feeling like I had lost not just my sister, but a part of myself. I kept wondering where it all went wrong. Could I have done something differently? Should I have fought harder or stepped away sooner? The guilt and heartbreak were unbearable. I realized that Paul's manipulation didn't just extend to Marie. It had started to seep into our entire family. He had created an environment where people were too afraid to challenge him or speak out, and now I was the one paying the price. Despite everything, I couldn't completely let go of the hope that Marie might come around. I kept holding on to the idea that she'd see Paul for who he really was and reach out to me. But as the days turned into weeks, that hope started to fade. After Paul's call and realizing I was completely cut off, I entered a kind of numb state. It felt unreal, like I had stepped into some cruel version of my life where my sister wasn't part of it anymore. Days passed, and I barely left my apartment. Every time I tried to distract myself, watching TV, scrolling through my phone, I'd stumble across something that reminded me of Marie. It was like her absence had carved a hole in my life I couldn't ignore. I kept going over everything in my head. How had we gone from being inseparable as kids to this? I thought about the times I'd been there for her, the way we'd leaned on each other through tough moments growing up. And now, she wouldn't even take my calls. Paul's words haunted me too. I couldn't forget the smug tone of his voice or the way he'd delivered the news with such finality. I knew he was manipulating her, but I also knew I couldn't force her to see it. That was the hardest part, realizing that no matter how much I wanted to save her from him, she had to want it for herself, and right now, she didn't. I also started pulling back from family gatherings. It felt too painful to sit in a room with people who knew what had happened but weren't willing to step in. Some of them were clearly on Marie and Paul's side, or at least didn't want to rock the boat. Others offered me quiet support, but it wasn't enough to bridge the gap. I felt isolated, like I was grieving someone who was still alive but completely unreachable. One day, I got a message from a mutual friend who had heard about what happened. She told me she was worried about Marie, that she'd seen signs of Paul's control before, but hadn't known how bad it was. Hearing that from someone else gave me a small sense of validation, but it also deepened my despair. If other people could see it, why couldn't Marie? The friend suggested we try to stage some kind of intervention. She thought if we could get Marie alone, away from Paul's influence, we might be able to help her see the truth. At first, I was hesitant. The last time I'd confronted Marie, it had only pushed her further away, but the idea of doing nothing felt unbearable, so I agreed to give it one last shot. We planned to meet Marie at her workplace during lunch, knowing Paul wouldn't be there. I was nervous, but I told myself this might be my chance to finally get through to her. When Marie saw me, her face immediately darkened. She looked angry, like I was the last person she wanted to see. I barely had time to explain why I was there before she started shutting me down. She accused me of ambushing her, of trying to meddle in her life. I tried to stay calm, reminding her that I was there because I cared about her. I told her how worried I was and how much I missed her, but every word seemed to bounce off her like it didn't matter. She kept repeating that I needed to respect her choices and leave her alone. The worst moment came when I mentioned Paul. I told her I didn't trust him, that he was manipulating her and isolating her from the people who loved her. That's when she exploded. She accused me of being jealous and bitter, of wanting to ruin her marriage because I was unhappy with my own life. Her words were like daggers, and I could feel myself crumbling inside. She stormed out before I could say anything else, leaving me standing there with tears streaming down my face. The mutual friend tried to comfort me, but it was no use. I felt like I had officially lost her for good. After that, I knew I had to stop trying. Every attempt to reach her was only pushing her further into Paul's manipulation. It was clear she wasn't ready to see the truth, and I couldn't keep sacrificing my own well-being in a futile effort to save her. One of the hardest things was accepting that Marie might never come back. I still hold on to a sliver of hope that one day she'll see Paul for who he really is and realize what she's lost. But I've also learned that I can't put my life on hold waiting for that to happen. As for Marie, I'll always love her. She's my sister, and no matter how much distance Paul puts between us, that bond will never fully break. But for now, I have to let her go. I have to trust that she'll find her way back when she's ready, and that until then, I've done everything I can.